This is part 4 of the series asking if the traditional movement is dead. So far, I've shared the results of a 2025 survey about attendance at the traditional Latin Mass, and I've explored the new type of ecumenism and the changes to the Church's worship and sacramental life, which were strategies to implement an overarching goal of transforming the Church into something she had never been before. You can find links to all those videos in the description. Today, I want to discuss the third strategy, changes in church doctrine. Now, my forthcoming book will document all of this carefully and fully. But frankly, looking at streams of documenting data on a video, well, it's boring. Actually, it might be boring in the book too, but at least there you'll have the documentation you need, the ammunition you need to take to your poker nights and ruin the evening for everyone. Or for you boomers, I guess they will be canasta parties. So to keep it engaging, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to give you a kind of executive summary of my findings regarding the changes in church doctrine. But rest assured, everything I give you in summary form is fully documented. Second, I'll share a story with you that I think will tie all of this together, the new ecumenism, the changes in liturgy, and the changes in doctrine, how they have worked together to make the Catholic Church something almost unrecognizable from her preconciliar form. We'll begin with the topic of religious liberty. Prior to Vatican Council II, the Church's position regarding religious liberty, from the beginning, can be summarized in this way. Only one true religion, Catholicism, has objective rights, even if, for reasons of prudence, non-Catholic governments are tolerated. Error, including false religions, has no rights per se. The state must recognize and support the true religion. Now, the state may tolerate false religions, but they have no right to be considered equal. And the conscience of an individual does not include a natural right to choose error, including a false religion. Now, even you hardcore trads might see this and think, wow, yes, we've come a long way, and I'm just getting started. The Vatican Council II document, Dignitatis Humanae, overturns these teachings. This document grounds religious freedom in human dignity, which is also reconfigured in other Vatican II documents. It also further grounds religious freedom in personal conscience, discarding the notion of objective evil. It affirms a civil right to religious liberty, and it applies this liberty even to those adhering to religions other than the Catholic Church. After the Council, we see numerous examples of these new principles being applied or implemented, such as Pope John Paul II, in an address to the United Nations in 1979, stating, "Religious freedom is the cornerstone of the structure of human rights." The 1992 edition of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, stating, "The right to religious liberty is founded on the dignity of the human person." Or even Pope Benedict XVI's 2005 address to the Roman Curia, when he indicated that Vatican II recognized that the state must not impose religion, but must guarantee religious freedom. On to human dignity and conscience. Prior to Vatican Council II, the Church's position regarding human dignity and conscience can be summarized in this way. Human dignity is tied to man living in the image and likeness of God. It is forfeited through sin. Conscience is not autonomous. It must conform to objective moral truth. It can never be a justification for evil, even though it may mitigate culpability. Error has no rights. It cannot be the justifiable end of conscience. The Vatican Council II document Gaudium et Spes overturns these teachings. This document describes conscience as a sanctuary. It teaches that man retains his dignity even when he is invincibly erroneous. Following the Council, perhaps the most telling statement regarding the Church's evolution regarding the idea of human dignity is found in the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith's 2024 declaration called Dignitatis Infinita on Human Dignity, which says, "Every human person possesses an infinite dignity, inalienably grounded in his or her very being. And this dignity exists in every person, regardless of any circumstance or state." Well, if a person has infinite dignity that exists regardless of any circumstance or state, ultimately this means that sin has no consequence on the person. Ergo, there is no sin. This is how we can come to the conclusion that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and the dignity of the human person, or that divorced and remarried couples can receive communion. Now, to be fair and fully transparent, in Pope John Paul II's encyclical Veritatis Splendor, he does clarify conciliar inconsistencies regarding conscience, saying that conscience is not autonomous, that conscience must conform to the truth, and the dignity of conscience is derived from the truth. Good job. However, the 1992 edition of the Catechism of the Catholic Church is not so precise as the Holy Father was, even if it can be interpreted in the light of tradition. Man has the right to act in conscience and in freedom so as personally to make moral decisions. In addition, we need only look at pastoral applications to see that church teaching has changed regarding conscience, at least operationally, if not officially. Let me offer a personal story as an example. When we were homeschooling our daughters, at one point we came to a unit in the Catechism on the Commandments. Well, as chance would have it, that weekend at Mass, it was a Novus Ordo Missae, the Old Testament lection told the story of Moses receiving the Ten Commandments. And after the lections, the priest stepped up to the pulpit to give a homily on the commandments. I was elated. Our pastor was going to reinforce what we had been teaching, learning at home. However, when he approached the third commandment, he asked the question, "Is it a mortal sin to miss Mass on Sunday?" Then he answered his question with a discourse on relationships, saying essentially that missing one Mass would begin to damage our relationship with God, but it would not necessarily break it, that is, cut off the relationship through mortal sin. However, if missing Mass were to become a habit, he warned, at some point it would indeed break the relationship. Well, of course I was devastated. He had completely dismissed the idea of objective evil. He had dismissed Pope John Paul's clarification of the conciliar misconceptions of conscience. In addition, he had now pitted me, my daughter's father, against himself, the pastor, who was viewed by my children as the voice of truth and the representative of the Church's teaching authority. Well, without digressing too far into personal post-conciliar calamities, this is a good example of how post-conciliar ideas around conscience have succumbed to personalism and relativism, certainly in practice, if not in official doctrine. So on we go to ecclesiology. Prior to Vatican Council II, the Church's position regarding ecclesiology, from the beginning, can be summarized in one sentence. The Catholic Church, established by Jesus Christ himself, is the one true church, outside of which there is no salvation. The Vatican Council II document Lumen Gentium overturns this teaching. This document acknowledges that the fullness of Christ's church continues concretely in the Catholic Church. But it also recognizes that elements of sanctity and truth exist outside the Church. The significant passage is paragraph 8. The Church, constituted and organized in the world as a society, subsists in the Catholic Church, while many elements of sanctification and of truth are found outside its visible structure. At first glance, it may seem that there are elements of truth here. There are elements of truth in every heresy. For example, Scripture exists in non-Catholic Christian religions, and Scripture is an element of sanctity and truth. However, the Bible in non-Catholic religions does not contain the same books as the Catholic Bible. And Scripture in non-Catholic religions is interpreted and taught differently than it is in the Catholic Church. Specifically, it is interpreted and taught in non-Catholic religions in ways that contradict Catholic doctrine. So while it's true that Scripture is a source of sanctity and truth, it cannot be assumed that Scripture in non-Catholic religions is a source of sanctity and truth. Indeed, it is not. So the premise of this phrase is simply not true. It is the Catholic Church that safeguards the sanctity and truth of anything that contains such. Following the Council, this abdication of the Catholic Church as the one true church established by Jesus Christ, and therefore outside of which there is no salvation, was quickly taken up in various decrees, such as the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, stating in 1993 that, where appropriate, Catholics should be encouraged, in accordance with the Church's norms, to join in prayer with Christians of other churches and ecclesial communities. Such prayers in common are certainly a very effective means of petitioning for the grace of unity, and they are a genuine expression of the ties which still bind Catholics to these other Christians. Shared prayer is in itself a way to spiritual reconciliation. Then, a joint declaration on the doctrine of justification made in 1999 by the Catholic Church and the Lutheran World Federation, stating that a consensus in basic truths of the doctrine of justification exists between Lutherans and Catholics. Okay, let's look now at the topic of ecumenism and interreligious dialogue. Prior to Vatican Council II, the Church's position regarding ecumenism and interreligious dialogue can be summarized this way. The only path to religious unity is the return of non-Catholics to the one true Church. Interreligious or interconfessional dialogue conducted on a basis of equality or mutual exchange of beliefs is rejected. The Vatican Council II documents change these teachings to new modes of engagement that can be summarized this way. A model of dialogue recognizing real, though incomplete, communion with other Christians. Affirming elements of truth and holiness in non-Christian religions, while still maintaining that the fullness of truth subsists in the Catholic Church. Okay, some explanation is warranted here. The concept of incomplete or imperfect or partial communion is an intellectual novelty created by the Council. It has no basis in reality. Communion is binary. Either someone or some entity is in communion with the Church or not. There is no such thing as partial communion. To give an analogy, can we speak of a partial or incomplete or imperfect marriage? No. one is either married or not. Okay, let's not get sidetracked. I know some of you are thinking, well, my marriage is not perfect. Yes, there are marriages that may be less than perfect, but that's a description of your relationship, not a description of the essence of the union. The idea of an incomplete union was a conciliar fabrication to attempt to recognize something as in communion that was not. Also, I've already touched upon the idea of truth and holiness in non-Christian religions. This too is a fabrication that has no basis in reality. However, the conciliar documents are rife with language promoting these novel and untrue ideas. Now, one might argue that many of the conciliar and even post-conciliar statements regarding ecumenism and interreligious dialogue are attempts to soften historical rhetoric in order to establish a relationship that will ultimately result in conversion. Well, if that were the case, it has failed miserably. In truth, I don't think that was ever the intention. The evidence and the results, which no one seems to care about enough to change course, just don't support this idea. Just look at a few of the post-conciliar implementations of ecumenical dialogue. In 1964, before the council ended, the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue was established, and it was expanded after the council. In 1986, at an interreligious prayer meeting held at Assisi, Pope John Paul II stated, "The fact that we have come here does not imply any intention of seeking a religious consensus." Following directives from the council, several ecumenical translations of the Bible were created following the council. A 1965-66 Catholic edition of the Revised Standard Version of the Bible. An explicitly ecumenical New Revised Standard Version of the Bible in 1989. And the Good News Bible, today's English version, between 1966 and 76, was approved for use in Catholic settings. Of course, we might even wonder if interreligious dialogue is even necessary today, with Pope Leo XIV stating in January of 2026 regarding the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Anglican Communion, "We are one, we already are. Let us recognize it, experience it, and make it visible." And one final area, the theology of the Mass. Now, in an earlier video, I spoke in general terms about the radical changes to the Mass. Here I want to mention the new Mass as a change in church doctrine. Prior to the Council, the teaching of the Church regarding the Mass was, always, that the Mass is the unbloody representation or renewal of the sacrifice of Calvary, in which Christ offers himself through the ministry of the priest. The Council of Trent affirmed this teaching most strongly, saying in Canon 1, "If anyone says that in the Mass a true and real sacrifice is not offered to God, or that to be offered is nothing else than that Christ is given to us to eat, let him be anathema." Vatican Council II itself made no changes to the Mass, or any specific changes to this definition. However, in the general instruction of the Roman Missal that accompanied the promulgation of the Novus Ordo Missae, the new Mass, paragraph 7 of this document defined the Mass as follows: "The congregation assembled, the priest presiding, to celebrate the memorial of the Lord. For this reason, Christ's promise applies eminently to such a local gathering of the Holy Church, where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there am I in their midst." This redefines the Mass as a gathering for a meal, a memorial of the Last Supper. Yes, shortly after this definition of the Mass in the General Instruction of the Roman Missal in 1969 edition, an outcry of objection arose, and as a result, this new definition of the Mass was quickly removed and replaced with the traditional definition that defines the Mass as the unbloody renewal of the sacrifice of Calvary. However, none of the changes in the Mass that supported the new definition was changed. A new Mass was created that embraced a new theology, even if the technical definition was not changed. Now, there are certainly elements of the Council that reinforce perennial church teaching. However, when we examine the overall picture, there can be no doubt that things changed significantly, both in the Council and afterwards, that these changes were intentional, and that they involve more than superficial external elements of the church. The various changes that I've mentioned here and in previous videos are just samplings. They do not constitute an exhaustive list. Even so, they demonstrate the enormity of the changes. And as I just said, these changes are not just in superficial externals, they are fundamental. So let me now share that story with you that I promised. I think it will tie all these things together and show how these strategies have worked in tandem to create a new religion. When I was in grade school in Wilmington, Delaware, we lived in the city on North Van Buren Street, here. And here is our home. It's a great house. Our parish church and school, Christ our King, were on Monroe Street, just off the map from here. Now, to walk to school, we had two possible paths. We could go this way, or we could go this way. Both paths crossed Baynard Boulevard, a very busy street. The first path was the safest because there was a traffic light on Baynard Boulevard here. The second path was maybe a little quicker, but not significantly so. So logic would seem to dictate that we take the first path. But it wasn't that easy. Right on the corner of Baynard Boulevard, where the traffic light was, there was a Methodist church, here. And it wasn't even separated from the sidewalk by some stairs or maybe a little hill. It sat right next to the sidewalk. If we took the path with the traffic light to school, we had to walk right by that Protestant church. And that was just too scary. Just going by a Protestant church was a near occasion of sin. Much better to take the other path and risk our bodies than to take the path by the traffic light and risk our souls. Today this might seem a little silly, but that's the point. Everything in and after the Council, the new approach to ecumenism, the changes to our worship, making it more Protestant-friendly, actual changes to doctrine, the rhetoric that the essence of the faith was not changing, just some of the externals, so we could engage the modern world more effectively, were all designed to transform the church. Not just reinterpret or renew things, but to transform them, to change them, and to do so in ways that would make the old church eventually seem silly. Think about it. Today, we don't just walk by Protestant churches without discomfort. We actually participate in Protestant services, services created by men who rejected Catholic teaching. And we do it with permission and even encouragement. Let me give you a comparative story to show how this works. In the 1990s, absolutely no one would have even conceived of same-sex marriages, much less approved of them. Then, starting in the late 90s, we had TV shows, such as the comedy called Will and Grace, that made gay life humorous. I feel a little creepy just putting this picture up. It disarmed the topic by making it funny. We began to think, well, these guys aren't so bad, they're just normal people. Well, of course, no one is intrinsically bad. Everyone is just a normal person. We now have separated the dignity of the person from his acts. The seeds of the Francis concept of infinite dignity have been sown. Well, then it progressed to, well, as long as I don't have to see it, that is, what do I care what someone does in the privacy of the bedroom? After all, do I go around checking to see if heterosexual couples are using contraception? So now we've progressed to saying that evil is okay as long as I don't have to look at it. Well, from here, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to, who am I to judge? That is, who am I to say what is evil? Well, of course, we don't say evil. God does. We just obey what he tells us. But in any case, we've now progressed to morality being personal and relative. With the stage being set this way, is it any surprise that gay marriage becomes a constitutionally protected right? This is exactly what happened to the church, by way of the council and its implementation. The Reformers had a well-considered plan to transform the church into something she had never been before. They executed this plan in a three-pronged strategy that included a new type of ecumenism, radical changes to the church's worship and sacramental life, and ultimately a change in church doctrine. The plan was brilliant, and the execution was flawless, except for one thing. The Reformers never planned on a resistance movement, a movement that would hold fast to the unchanging beliefs, practices, and teachings of the church. That is, a movement that would hold fast to tradition. And in the next episode, we'll take a look at this traditional movement. Just what is it? Is it just about aesthetics, more bells and smells and pretty pageantry? Or is it something deeper?
Stella meus in